So I want to tell you the origin story behind the six building blocks and where they came from. So this actually was not the intent of the original project that resulted in their development. The original project was to study 30 very exemplary, high-performing primary care clinics across the United States. Clinics that were implementing team-based care and doing something innovative about how they utilize their team. So my group here at the McCall Center at the Research Institute, the Kaiser Permanente Research Institute here in Seattle, visited 30 sites across the United States with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to understand team-based care. And we spent a week in each of these sites and observed, interviewed, collected documents, tried to figure out the secret sauce. And what we discovered after about the first 4 or 5 site visits was that many, if not all of them, were implementing changes in how they manage their patients with chronic pain who are on long-term opioid therapy. So you'll hear us use the phrase long-term opioid therapy. Other people call it chronic opioid therapy. These are people who are using opioids daily to manage their chronic pain. So as we began seeing some similarities across these clinics, we began being more intensive and intentional about collecting and understanding what were the changes they made and how did they make those changes. So not just what were they doing at the time of the visit, but their journey. How did they get there? What were the steps they took to get to the point where they were implementing the changes in the way they cared for patients with chronic pain? So we organized them and studied them and figured out they were really 6 building blocks. There were 6 different areas of work. And we published these findings in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine back in 2017. And these are the 6 building blocks. These are the 6 areas of work that the clinics did to get to the point where they felt like they had improved the management of the patients with chronic pain who are using opioids daily. These are not sequential. These are not, you have to do this before you do this. These are just the buckets of areas of work. I will say the first bucket is pretty essential in order to do the other buckets, which is you have to have leadership support. Leadership has to recognize that this area is a priority for the practice, for the clinics, and there has to be a conversation about this so that a consensus develops that yes, this is an area that we all agree there needs to be some work in. The second bucket, again, not sequential, but the second bucket of work is that clinics tended to look at, well, how are we doing it now? Do we have a policy in place for how we manage patients who are on daily opioids? Do we have patient agreements? Do we have workflows? And do all 3 of those agree? Is there alignment between them? They also realized that this is a special population that probably needs to be tracked and monitored carefully to make sure that things aren't falling between the cracks. So they developed systems to track these patients and monitor them. Next, they also developed a way to think about planning for these visits ahead of time and doing some pre-visit planning and making the visit patient-centered and using things like shared decision-making and learning how to have empathic communication with patients about their chronic pain to improve the way they were cared for. They also recognized some patients were more complex and needed more resources, and so they began developing not only policies but access to these resources, especially mental behavioral health resources for some of the patients with chronic pain. And then finally, they recognized the need to say, how do we know the changes we're making are making a difference? So they began saying, what do we want to improve? How will we measure that? How will we observe that? Now let's monitor how we're doing as we're making these changes and see if the changes we're making are successful. What you'll see in these 6 building blocks is there's nothing in there that is specific about we want to teach providers. We want to educate providers. No, this is about making the right thing to do, the easy thing to do. It's about having a team of people that realize that we all have a role to play in making sure that these patients are managed safely and that the care they're receiving is evidence-based. A third thing about these building blocks is it turns out that it's very flexible because every clinic is in a different point in their journey about how they manage these patients. And every clinic has sometimes a different area of opportunity for improvement. So the building blocks are flexible in that approach about meeting clinics where they are. And finally, I just want to make the point, it is not about eliminating all opioid prescribing. There are patients for whom opioids are a reasonable choice. It's really about evidence-based chronic pain care and making sure that patients who are on opioids are managed safely. And patients who are on opioids but who are not benefiting from them may also be considered evidence-based ways of managing their chronic pain. So we rolled this out to 20 rural serving primary care clinics in Eastern Washington and Central Idaho. So yes, you heard me correctly. These were rural clinics. We used a practice facilitation approach, and Brooke, who's on the call today, on the meeting today, was the coach or the facilitator for these clinics making these changes. And what we saw during the course of the study was a steady decline in both the number of patients who were on long-term opioid therapy and among those who remained on long-term opioid therapy, a steady decline in their dose, what we call morphine equivalent. The percent who were on higher dose opioids steadily declined over the course of this study. And the link on this page will take you to the publication that has the statistical analyses compared to a control group. So you can see that the decline was significantly different in the clinics with the intervention compared to a control group of clinics. What I was really thrilled about was what we heard from the clinics toward the end of the project, toward the end of the study. They reported increased confidence and comfort in caring for patients with chronic pain. They reported that their teamwork and collaboration had increased, not only for patients with chronic pain, but other their more general patient population. And they reported decreased stress in providing care to patients who are on long-term opioid therapy. These were no longer the patients that when you saw their names on your schedule for the day, your heart would sink because you didn't feel like you had something else to offer them. That wasn't the case anymore for these patients. They also surprisingly, and they were surprised by this, reported that their relationships with patients actually improved. That patients who were on long-term opioid therapy were receptive to the changes they were making, much more so than they anticipated. And they had very few negative interactions with patients because they expected more pushback than they actually received when they began implementing these changes in their clinics. So I just want to point out again, and this I may sound like a broken record, primary care is a team-based sport. What I do depends on someone else doing their work. There's a dependency there. I depend on the team doing their thing so that I can do my thing. And change can be difficult. I mean, we're humans and change is always difficult, but changing a complex system is difficult. But the good news is that sometimes small changes can make a big difference. So changing systems supports everyone in delivering care that's more evidence-based, from the front desk, the patient representatives at the front desk, to the medical assistants, to the nursing staff, to the health IT support. Everyone's involved in making these changes. And this concept of a practice facilitation process, we have shown can be very effective in providing the support needed to enact those changes. So what is practice facilitation, and what do we mean by that? So facilitators enable others. Rather than telling, teaching, persuading, or coercing, you're providing at the elbow support to people who are trying to make these changes. You're enabling them. Facilitators have to be very flexible and responsive. They have to tailor their approach to the setting and the people involved in that change activity, because they're helping navigate these individuals and teams through a complex change process and help them figure out how to respond to the challenges that they're going to encounter in making those changes. So that's the role of a facilitator, and that's what we're here today to talk with you about. How do you facilitate the 6 Building Blocks program implementation in your clinic setting?